Another one I wanted to talk about, Mayor, is comes out of Executive Committee item 9.10, which has a pretty innocent-sounding name called Adjustments to Various Direct City Loans.
I hoped you'd ask me about that.
And
I'm so damn mad about that, Mark. I'll tell you what it is. I mean, we're writing off, and you've added them up. It's about $20 million of loans.
$25 million. Yeah, and for the listeners, this is an item we talked about it a couple of weeks ago that are various loans to city arts facilities. Sony Centre for the Performing Arts for $7 million, Toronto Centre for the Performing Arts up at Melasson Square for $10 million, and then this one that just infuriates me, writing off the Lakeshore Arena Corporation $8 million from their loan, and then guaranteeing a $12 million loan for them as if they could pay $12 million back if they can't pay the $8 million back.
I was told, Mark, that those loans, all three that you mentioned, basically the staff and the politicians, and I should say, I don't mean to be unduly political about this, but my understanding is that my predecessor voted for all three of those loans, but that basically the politicians and the staff knew from the day those loans were put on the books that they wouldn't be paid back. And I think that is scandalous, not so much from the standpoint that maybe we could have had a discussion and said, fine, are we going to put $6 or $8 million or whatever it is into the Sony Centre or not? But the bottom line is when they, I think, sort of mislead the voters by having them believe it's a loan that's going to be paid back, then that's not right. And I'm just mad that that's happened. And I can tell you, I'm going to be doing my level best to make sure that we don't, if we're going to give money to some place for the arts or for sports or whatever, fine. Then we'll have a discussion about giving the money. But this notion you kind of camouflage these things and then pretend you're going to pay them back and 3 or 4 years later write them off is, to me, just why people lose faith in government. So I'm not happy about this, and I will say so when the matter is debated, but I'm going to vote to write them off only because it's like a loan that you have in your personal life. I mean, once you get to the stage where you know you're not going to pay it off, it's better to deal with it than it is to sort of pretend.
But what's the hurry to write them off when you could perhaps send it back and say, no, come back to us with a plan for these agencies? Because I'll tell you what you may not have been told, which was when I was there, we had great discussions about this. The Sony Centre for the Performing Arts, there's no one in the arts community even that thinks the city should own that. The idea from the very get-go was to keep it alive because it had to be kept alive while they figure out what to do to dispose of it and then dispose of it. And the Lakeshore Arena Corporation was only supposed to exist for 3 months while they got the books together to put it on the market because it's a private sector. Is any effort going to be, can you hold off on these loan guarantees and write-offs and say, no, come back with a plan to dispose of these assets?
You made the point on the MasterCard Centre, the sports one, that, even after we write off this portion of the loan, they're going to have a loan left, and I'm in doubt as to whether that's going to be a performing loan, like, in other words, a loan that's in good standing. So I think the answer to the question is we have to suck it up and just decide that this thing was a financial fiasco way back, several years ago and write off part of it, but we're still leaving loans. With respect to the Sony Centre, I'll only say this. We are in some discussions now with respect to some very exciting private sector related options for that theater, and I would just say that person's not going to come along and say, well, I'm going to pay back some old loan you put on the place from days gone by. So I think that the bottom line is to, again, be realistic about it and say that loan is not going to be paid back out of the future success of this place, because if somebody else runs it or does something with it, we'll be lucky if it makes a profit and just pays for itself. And so I just think they are being realistic now and saying these should be written off. The part that aggravates me is they tell me that they knew this would be happening down the road back when the loans were extended, and that's the part that's aggravating.
Well, they knew, but they also knew that they weren't supposed to let it get this far. They were supposed to have sold those places and paid off the loans. They knew if they kept them in operations, they'd never pay back.
You were around, and this is the story they peddle you, though, and I think the problem that politicians have, and look, I may be guilty of it one day myself, in which case you can call me on and chastise me, is that you fall for that stuff.
Yeah.
Anybody looking at the Sony Centre would have said, look, especially when it's run by the city, and people came along, I think, with various kind of smoke and mirrors, propositions for it. The city is not in the theater business. In terms of being able to know how to run a theater. There are theater people in the theater business, and so anyway, we'll see how it all turns out. But I think we're being realistic about this loan. And you know what? At some point, if somebody miraculously pays it back, the fact you've written it off doesn't matter. Then you have a windfall.